Today, we are diving into the incredible and thrilling Battle of El Alamein, one of the most iconic and strategic battles of World War II. Get ready for a journey through the scorching desert, where courage, cunning, and determination shaped the fate of entire nations. Rommel's cunning strategy worked. While his Italian allies faced most of the British forces in the center of the Gazala line, the Afrika Korps managed to break through the southern flank and attack them from the rear. However, the Desert Fox was about to face an imminent threat. His elite troops were trapped in the fortified position known as the Cauldron. Heavy artillery attacks and increasing numbers of British tanks constantly surrounded the hardened and tanned German soldiers. Some men grew uneasy with the explosion of shells around them, but Rommel remained calm. He knew the British were overly confident in their numerical superiority, a weakness he could exploit. It was only a matter of time before the opportunity arose to deceive the enemy with his panzers and lead them into Egypt. On November 18, 1941, the British 8th Army launched Operation Crusader, with more than twice the number of tanks that the Germans and Italians had available in the North African theater of operations. Despite logistical and military limitations, Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, skillfully maneuvered his panzers and his Italian allies to mount a stiff defense against the reinvigorated British. The clever use of hidden anti-tank weapons and quick attacks with his armored vehicles allowed Rommel to momentarily overcome the British offensive. Suspense was in the air. Every move was crucial, and the tension increased with each decision made. Rommel knew that the margin for error was minimal, but his confidence in his tactics and in the capabilities of his men was unshakable. Quite impressively, the Axis also managed to hold the line in the sky, despite the British numerical superiority of 4-1. The Luftwaffe and the courage of the Italian pilots, who flew obsolete aircraft, were so effective that the 8th Army's general, Alan Cunningham, considered suspending the attack. However, the British numerical advantage soon began to show results, forcing Rommel's troops to abandon Cyrenaica and regroup at El Agheila by the end of December 1941, with only 2 tank companies and a few artillery pieces. Instead of advancing directly against the Axis troops, most British forces paused to consolidate their territorial gains and focused on relieving Tobruk. Even so, they overstretched their logistical lines, reaching about 800 kilometers, which led to a reduction in troop effectiveness in the El Agheila region, where the Axis had retreated. This valuable time allowed Rommel to wait for possible reinforcements and build new lines of fortifications for the next attack. Meanwhile, the British were improving their communication and supply lines when they received news of the elimination of Force K, which had stumbled into an Italian minefield off Tripoli. The destruction of the Royal Navy's commercial raiders allowed the Axis troops to receive more supplies and reinforcements in Libya after a 2-month delay. Among the men, food, ammunition, and tanks received, Rommel also welcomed the 2nd Air Corps of the Luftwaffe, Fliegerkorps II, which had been relocated from the intense fighting on the Eastern Front. The atmosphere of suspense and expectation was palpable. Rommel's troops, though exhausted, were once again prepared to face the enemy. Each day, the tension increased, with both sides preparing for the next major battle. The soldiers knew that the fate of the North African campaign was at stake, and every move was crucial. Rommel's courage and cunning, combined with the determination of his troops, created a scenario of emotion and uncertainty, where the outcome was unpredictable and victory was still within reach. Revitalized by this humanitarian support, the Desert Fox was ready to go back on the offensive. The British had no idea what was coming. After Christmas Day in 1941, the British 8th Army launched an attack against the fortified Axis forces at El Agheila, believing they were at a disadvantage in both manpower and firepower. To the surprise of the British, the Axis units effectively repelled the attack, prompting Rommel to unleash a swift offensive that caught the entire 8th Army off guard. The Afrika Korps destroyed the enemy formations, leaving them in disarray. As a result, the British were forced to quickly abandon the newly conquered territory. British intelligence estimated that the Axis had a fighting force of about 35,000 men, when in reality, Rommel commanded 50,000 Germans and 30,000 Italians. The British regrouped at the Gazala Bur Hakim line, located west of Tobruk. In early January 1942, Rommel began probing their lines to gather information about the army's condition and defenses. On January 21st, the Desert Fox dispatched 3 armored columns for another reconnaissance operation that, once Rommel identified the gaps, turned into an offensive resulting in the recapture of Benghazi and Timimai. The German general then focused all his attention on the Gazala line. What followed was a game of cat and mouse, with each side testing the other's strength. The tension was palpable. The British soldiers, despite their numerical superiority, felt the growing pressure from Rommel's unpredictable tactics. Every move in the desert was filled with suspense, with ambushes and counterattacks keeping everyone on high alert. Rommel knew that the key to victory was exploiting the enemy's overconfidence and striking at their weak points. The British, on the other hand, were determined not to repeat past mistakes. They reinforced their positions and adjusted their strategies, hoping to thwart the Desert Fox's plans. The stage was set for a series of decisive confrontations that would determine control of North Africa. The unfolding battle was more than just a clash of forces. It was a test of will and intelligence, where every decision could mean the difference between victory and defeat. In February 1942, scattered firefights between armored units extended from Gazala, 50 kilometers west of Tobruk, to Bur Hakim, located 80 kilometers to the south. The Gazala line consisted of a series of fortified positions, including trenches, bunkers, minefields, barbed wire entanglements, and anti-tank obstacles. These elements were strategically positioned to create an almost impenetrable barrier against any attacking force, especially armored units. The natural landscape of the Gazala region played a crucial role in the effectiveness of the defensive line. With escarpments, rocky outcrops, and undulating terrain, the area offered natural cover and advantageous positions for the defending British forces. Despite its formidable defenses, the Gazala line was not adequately manned. Most of the troops were concentrated along the coast, leaving the south with fewer defenders. However, the new commanders of the 8th Army, General Sir Claude Auchinleck and Major General Neil Ritchie, did their best to distribute their men in brigade-strength boxes, making them more effective in case of an attack. The Commonwealth Fortress and other fortifications were located behind the main defensive line at Tobruk, in case it was breached by the Axis. The 1st Free French Division was tasked with defending Bur Hakim. As spring approached, both armies received more supplies and reinforcements for the upcoming military operations, including Grant tanks for the British and Panzer IVs for the Germans. The tension grew each day, with the expectation of an imminent confrontation. The sound of tank engines and the distant noise of gunfire created a palpable atmosphere of suspense. The British soldiers, aware of the enemy's strength, reinforced their positions and prepared their weapons, while the Germans, led by Rommel, planned their next moves with calculated precision. When the attack finally began, the night was illuminated by explosions and artillery fire. The roar of cannons and the rumble of tank engines echoed across the desert, turning the tranquil landscape into a chaotic battlefield. The British defenders fought bravely, taking advantage of every benefit the terrain offered, while the Germans advanced with relentless determination. Each moment was filled with emotion and suspense, with the fate of many hanging in the balance. The battle for the Gazala line would not be decided by brute force alone, but by tactical intelligence and the courage of the men involved. The Desert War, with its unique difficulties and constant challenges, continued to test the limits of everyone who participated in a desperate struggle for supremacy in North Africa. Rommel's forces included the already famous DAK, or Deutsches Afrika Korps, consisting of the 15th and 21st Panzer Divisions and the 90th Light Division. Additionally, the Desert Fox commanded the Italian X Corps, with the Brescia and Pavia divisions, the XX Corps, with the Ari-8 and Trieste divisions, and the XXI Army Corps, which included the German Schutzen Brigade and the Trento and Sabratha divisions. Rommel's battle plan was ingenious. He planned to use the X and XX Corps to launch a feint attack against the Allied troops through the Gazala line, with the objective of drawing them in. At the same time, the majority of the Afrika Korps and the XX Corps would move through the south, where the British were more vulnerable, bypassing their fortifications to attack them from the rear. If the maneuver were successful, the DAK would force the Allied troops to abandon the Gazala front. With the plans set and the armored units resupplied, Rommel launched Unternehmen Venezia, or Operation Venice. It was a risky mission, and Rommel knew it. It was a David versus Goliath battle. Over 80,000 men were about to attack a fortified Allied line, defended by over 170,000 soldiers. Even so, the Desert Fox remained confident. Fortune favors the bold. Prime Minister Winston Churchill urged Auchinleck to mount an attack against the Axis as soon as possible, but Rommel was faster and struck first, with force. At 2 p.m. on May 26, he mobilized the X and XXI Corps to attack the central portion of the Gazala line. The suspense was mounting. Troops moved quickly through the desert, each with a crucial role to play. The soldiers knew they were part of a daring maneuver, with high risks but also the promise of a decisive victory. Tank engines roared, dust rose, and the sound of gunfire echoed across the battlefield. Rommel, with his characteristic cunning, observed every move. He knew that success depended on the precise execution of the plan and the courage of his men. The battle intensified, with explosions lighting up the sky and the sound of artillery fire filling the air. The atmosphere of tension and emotion was palpable. Each soldier was aware that their actions could change the course of the battle. The unfolding events were uncertain, but Rommel's determination and his troops' bravery kept hope alive. Operation Venice was turning into an epic confrontation, where every decision, every move, could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The battlefield was ablaze, and the fate of the North African campaign hung in the balance. Rommel's audacity and the resilience of his troops would be tested to the limit in a desperate struggle for supremacy. The Axis began with a heavy artillery barrage to soften the obstacles in Gazala before engaging the enemy. The Italians, along with some elements of the DAK, attacked with fierce determination. Smoke, oil, and dense clouds of fire began to fill the horizon as the first clashes erupted. Meanwhile, Rommel mobilized the rest of the Afrika Corps during the night to deceive the British. They were followed by an Italian armored and motorized infantry division. 4 Italian divisions stayed behind, continuing the attack on the Gazala line. In the early hours of May 27th, Erwin Rommel, leading the Panzerarmee Africa and the Italian troops, spearheaded a bold flanking maneuver around the southern section of the Gazala line. He audaciously used the Allied minefields to protect his flank and rear. However, the Ariete Division was temporarily held up by the 3rd Indian Motor Brigade of the 7th Armored Division, near the southeast of Bur Hakim. Although the Indians eventually withdrew, they inflicted several losses on the Italico 8 and 9 medium tanks, at the cost of about 440 dead and 1,000 prisoners. Meanwhile, the 15th Panzer Division was attacked by the 4th Armored Brigade of the 7th Armored Division, which had been reinforced with 200 American M3 Grant tanks. The Germans were impressed by the range of these tanks, forcing them to execute quick maneuvers to avoid enemy fire. The Panzers had to close in on the British to overcome the superior range and penetration capabilities of the Grants. Rommel later wrote that the Grant's 75mm guns tore huge holes in our ranks. The clashes interrupted Rommel's objective of reaching the sea by May 28th, but he was not willing to surrender so easily. The tension was palpable, with every move filled with emotion and suspense. The soldiers knew they were in the midst of a crucial battle, where each decision could determine the outcome. The night sky was illuminated by explosions, and the sound of artillery fire echoed across the desert. Rommel, with his bold strategy and unwavering courage, continued to inspire his troops. He knew the battle would be tough, but he believed that tenacity and determination could turn the tide in his favor. The intense fighting and the uncertainty of the outcome kept everyone on edge, as the struggle for supremacy in North Africa continued. Despite setbacks, the Axis divisions managed to advance more than 80 kilometers into British territory. The German 90th Light Division faced a motorized brigade near Retma, forcing it into a hasty retreat to Bir el Gubi. The Axis then resumed their advance towards El Adem, capturing several supply depots along the way. The fighting between tanks and armored vehicles lasted for 3 days, leaving a trail of smoldering tanks across the vast and arid landscape. As more British armor approached, Rommel ordered his troops to take defensive positions and fortified an area that became known as the Cauldron. This maneuver left Rommel and his troops isolated from the rest of their divisions, but he used the extensive British minefields to his advantage to protect his troops from attacks coming from the west. In the early days of June 1942, the DAK and the Italian Corps were attacked by the Royal Air Force, while the armored units of the 8th Army attempted to encircle Rommel. However, the Axis resisted the strong attack, forcing the British to commit their last reserves in costly assaults, where they lost men and armor without success. They believed the Desert Fox was about to surrender, but Rommel was far from it. Even as his supplies dwindled dangerously low, he received ammunition, food, and fuel from the Italian allies fighting around Bir Hakeim. The location, defended by the 1st Free French Brigade under the command of Marie-Pierre Koenig, withstood several attacks from the Trieste Division, inflicting heavy casualties with their precise 75mm guns. Despite this, the Italian troops and German auxiliary units continued to attack the French fortifications for another week, surrounding the French and preventing any external aid. This allowed the Trieste and Ari divisions to cross the minefield north of Bir Hakeim and join Rommel's Afrika Korps. Reunited, Rommel dispersed the British units surrounding him and sent another Kampfgruppe to capture Bir Hakeim. The British commanders ordered the 8th Army to attack Rommel on June 5, but they were again repelled by precise anti-tank fire from the Cauldron. Days later, on June 9, the French finally surrendered at Bir Hakeim. With the area secured, Rommel spread his forces and counterattacked the British at Knightsbridge Box, east of Bir el Halmat. The headquarters of 2 British divisions were overrun, leading to the total collapse of the command chain and the disarray of the Allied units in the area. Chaos ensued among the British troops as Rommel, with his bold strategy and relentless determination, continued to advance, turning each movement into a step towards victory. The battle at Gazala, marked by twists and moments of extreme tension, showcased Rommel's skill in overcoming adversity and exploiting the enemy's weaknesses. With each decision made in the heat of combat, the suspense and emotion increased, keeping everyone on edge as the fate of North Africa hung in the balance. On June 10, the British ordered an evacuation to avoid being encircled. After Knightsbridge, Rommel's panzers advanced on the positions at El Adem, defeating the scattered British units. While the Germans and Italians consolidated their positions on the Gazala line, General Sir Claude Auchinleck and Major General Neil Ritchie decided to abandon the line on June 14, after the panzer divisions destroyed their armored units with a converging attack from the east. Most of the British armored forces were trapped by the 21st Panzer Division in a narrow corridor known as Rigel Ridge, where they were decimated by converging fire. Of the more than 700 British tanks, fewer than 120 were left combat-ready. Some men from the 2nd Scots Guards and the 6th South African Anti-Tank Battery managed to escape with their lives. Those who survived were captured. The 1st South African Division and the 50th Northumbrian Division retreated almost intact along the coastal road after some minor skirmishes. As the British and their allies fell back to Mersa Matruh in Egypt, the troops left behind to defend Tobruk surrendered on June 21. The battle for Gazala cost the Allies approximately 98,000 men, including wounded, captured, and killed. More than 550 tanks were lost, many of which had been supplied by the Americans. German and Italian casualties did not exceed 32,000 men and 115 tanks. For his impressive victory, the Desert Fox, Rommel, was promoted to Field Marshal. The atmosphere of tension was intense. Every retreat, every movement, was filled with suspense. The British forces, attempting to regroup amid the chaos, faced the relentless pressure of Rommel's troops. Desperation and determination were visible on the soldiers' faces as they fought to survive and maintain some hope of resistance. Rommel, with his strategic skill and fearless leadership, continued to press forward, exploiting every weakness and maintaining the initiative. The victory at Gazala not only bolstered his reputation, but also dealt a devastating blow to the Allies, who now faced the harsh reality of desert warfare. The events unfolded like a suspenseful plot, where every decision could change the course of history. The tension increased with each confrontation, and the fate of North Africa seemed to hang in the balance, awaiting Rommel's next move. The war was far from over, and the future battles promised to be even more fierce and decisive. The British evacuation to Mersa Matruh brought brief relief, but was not enough to ease the Axis pressure. Rommel, driven by his recent victory, wasted no time and began planning his next move. He knew that maintaining momentum was crucial to consolidating his gains and further pressuring the Allied forces. Meanwhile, the British were desperately trying to reorganize their defenses. Mersa Matruh, located about 160 kilometers east of Tobruk, became the new line of resistance. General Auchinleck was determined to avoid another disaster like Gazala. The British troops fortified their positions, preparing for an inevitable attack. At the end of June 1942, Rommel launched his offensive against Mersa Matruh. The battle began with an intense artillery bombardment, followed by the advance of the panzers and the Afrika Korps infantry. The deafening sound of the cannons and the roar of the tank engines created a chaotic scene, where every soldier fought with everything they had to hold their positions. The British defenses, though well prepared, could not withstand the pressure for long. Rommel's coordinated attacks broke through the British lines at several points, forcing a disorganized retreat. Mersa Matruh fell in a few days, with many British troops being captured or forced to retreat further east towards El Alamein. The fall of Mersa Matruh was a severe blow to Allied morale. However, Auchinleck knew that El Alamein was the last line of defense before Cairo and the Suez Canal. He gathered his forces and reinforced the defenses along the narrow strip of land between the Mediterranean and the Qattara Depression, where the terrain would hinder Rommel's flanking maneuvers. Rommel, in turn, was aware that El Alamein represented a formidable obstacle. But he was determined to continue his offensive. In early July, he launched a series of attacks to test the British defenses. The ensuing battles were intense, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The fighting at El Alamein became a true test of endurance and strategy. Each side sought to exploit the other's weaknesses while trying to preserve their own forces. The tension was palpable, with every move carefully calculated and every decision laden with potentially fatal consequences. The British troops, now under Auchinleck's direct command, showed fierce determination to resist. The defenses at El Alamein were reinforced with new units and supplies, including Sherman tanks newly arrived from the United States. Allied air superiority also began to make a difference, hampering Rommel's movements. Rommel, however, was not willing to give up. He continued to press with relentless attacks, seeking a breach in the British defenses. The desert nights were illuminated by explosions and tracers, while the sound of gunfire and battle cries echoed through the darkness. The suspense grew each day. Soldiers on both sides knew that the Battle of El Alamein could decide the fate of the North African campaign. The tension increased, with each attack and counterattack fraught with uncertainty and danger. The weeks dragged on, with Rommel and Auchinleck facing off in a series of fierce battles. El Alamein became a true testing ground for both armies. Constant attacks and stubborn defense transformed the desert landscape into a scene of destruction and bravery. Gradually, the Allies began to gain ground. Air superiority, along with the continuous influx of troops and equipment, started to turn the tide against Rommel. The British resistance proved unyielding, and Rommel's attacks began to lose momentum. The lack of supplies and constant pressure wore down his forces. By the end of October 1942, the British Eighth Army, now under the command of General Bernard Montgomery, launched a massive counteroffensive. Operation Lightfoot marked the beginning of the end for the Axis forces in Africa. Montgomery, with a meticulously planned strategy, managed to break through Rommel's lines, forcing him into a desperate retreat. The final battles at El Alamein were intense and bloody. Rommel, known for his cunning and courage, tried everything to hold his positions, but the Allies' strength was overwhelming. By November, the Axis forces were in full retreat, unable to withstand the relentless Allied advance. El Alamein was not just a military victory. It was a turning point in World War II. Rommel's defeat in North Africa marked the beginning of the Axis decline, and the Allies gained new hope. The desert, which had witnessed so much sacrifice and courage, now became the stage for a decisive victory. The story of the Battle of El Alamein is a testament to the bravery and resilience of all the soldiers involved. Every move, every decision, was filled with emotion and suspense, shaping the course of the war and the fate of nations. If you enjoyed this story and want to continue exploring the events that shaped the world, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Here, you'll find fascinating details of epic battles, military strategies, and heroes who made a difference. Your subscription helps us keep bringing more informative and exciting content to you. Until next time.